Thank you all for joining us for the third installment of our ongoing webinar series. We appreciate your attendance today. My name is Joe Lancer, and I'm the director for Metrics Lab's alcohol and beverage vertical, specializing in providing consulting, research, and strategy to our company's global beverage clients.
And hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Moran. I'm the global executive responsible for this business, the alcohol beverage business that is at Metrics Lab globally.
For our webinar today, we have about 25 minutes of content, at which point we will transition to a Q&A. Please submit any questions in the message box within the GoToMeeting page, and we will address those in the order that they come in. The topic of our webinar today is non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic beverage offerings. We'll talk about the emergence of and driving factors that propelled them into existence, as well as profile users. We'll overview top global non-alcoholic markets and brands and put the category size into perspective. And finally, we'll share our point of view on why you should care about this burgeoning category within the broader landscape. With that, let's get started. So what is non-alc and low-alc, often collectively referred to as NOLO, and how are they defined? When we talk about NOLO beverage offerings, we're not talking about traditional beverages like sodas, sparkling wine, or juices. Instead, they are framed as alternatives to traditionally alcoholic beverages like a spirit, wine, beer, cocktail, or in this case, a mocktail that contains zero alcohol. Your low alcoholic beverages are those that contain an ABV anywhere between 4 and 7%. ABV stands for alcohol by volume. You may have seen that on the label of a recent alcohol beverage that you consumed. Your low-alc beverages would be your canned cocktails, which we've seen growing in popularity in recent years, as well as hard seltzers. We also include within this low-alc subset your lower alcohol beverage offerings. An example of those might be, instead of a 40% ABV vodka, you may be looking at a vodka that has 1/3 or perhaps even half of the ABV of a traditional option. Other examples of NOLO offerings include vermouth, liqueurs, or digestifs. Let's take a more specific look at brands that reside underneath each of these categories that you may be familiar with. So within the non-alcoholic beer space, we have popular brands like O'Doul's, which has been around for decades, Kopparberg, and more recently Heineken 0.0. This is an offering that has quite a bit of marketing support behind it from Heineken. You may have seen some digital advertisements, television advertisements, out of home for Heineken 0.0. It is among the most popular brands within the non-alcoholic beer space. As we switch to non-alcoholic spirits, examples of those brands would be Seedlip, which was really the trailblazer in this non-alcoholic spirit space about 7 to 8 years ago, as well as popular brands like Lyrin's. In terms of existing brands in the marketplace, so those that offer full alcoholic proof offerings like Tanqueray and Gordon's, which are gins, we also know that these brands offer non-alcoholic alternatives for those who are not looking to have a spirit within their drink. Moving over now to your lower alcohol by volume spirits. So again, these are those with a lower ABV than a traditional, in this case, vodka. Popular brands within that subcategory are Kettle One Botanicals, which offer a variety of different flavor offerings, as well as Smirnoff Infusions, which are really leaning into their parent brand heritage as well as brand equity. And a new to world offering that came into the marketplace about 6 or 7 years ago was Plume and Petal, recognizing an opportunity to bring a lower proof offering to consumers. As we switch over now to the aperitifs, you may be familiar with the Martini, Vermouth, and Sparkling Wine brands. They actually have a non-alcoholic offering called Vibrante, which leverages the spritz, the popular spritz serve, as a signature serve for this non-alcoholic offering. Next, we take a look at the NOLO wines, which are the least popular and developed of these categories. Popular brands there include Ariel, St. Julian, as well as Stella Rosa, with Frey being a brand with a bit of momentum behind it in terms of sales. And then finally, taking a look at non-alc and low-alc canned cocktails and hard seltzers. Popular brands within that subcategory include Lagunitas, which is a non-alcoholic alternative to the traditionally beer offerings for that brand, as well as non-alcoholic offerings from Gordon's and Tonic. So your RTD serve there a non-alcoholic version of the gin and tonic. And finally, canned cocktails, including High Noon and Cutwater, which offer popular drink options like the margarita, for example, but in a low ABV, ready-to-drink offering. Next, we're going to take a look at what the NOLO landscape looks like from a geographic perspective. So in this chart, we've listed the top 10 NOLO spirits markets in terms of number of sales. We have large countries showing up here like the US, the UK, Japan, and Germany being among the most developed NOLO spirits markets around the globe. But also have countries like Canada, that's a big canned beverage market, which we know is one of the subcategories that reside underneath NOLO, as well as France, which is a popular aperitif and liqueur market. You'll note there next to the US at 37%, we've added in case sales. So this is actually the representation of how many cases of NOLO spirits are sold in the US, the largest NOLO spirits market. But I think it's important to put into context what that 600,000 9-liter cases represents. It represents a very small fraction of the total number of spirits cases, that number in the hundreds of millions, that are actually being sold in the US. So still a largely undeveloped category relative to larger spirit categories.
Which brings us to the next chart, which is a pie chart that represents the total spirits volume share, including non-alc spirits globally. And the reason we wanted to bring this up is to, again, put perspective on the size of the opportunity here, or the current size as it sits now. The circled 0.03% number is non-alc spirits, right, as a percentage or piece of this pie. To put this into perspective, without suggesting that this category isn't growing significantly, but to put it into perspective, right, if you were to look at whiskey at 27%, whiskey is 90 times the size of here. If I were to look at the smallest smallest category of spirits, gin, it's about 14 times the size there. So while there is tremendous growth opportunities in terms of, and growth occurring in the non-alc space and the low-alc space as well, it is important to understand the size of it right now. So if it is that small now, I guess the question is, why do we care, right? Why would a spirits company, beer company, vintner, right, whoever it is, include this and develop this and spend money to market it, right, as part of their portfolio? Well, first of all, consumers want it, especially the LDA to 24, 25 age demographic. It's trendy, right? It's an opportunity to develop a relationship with that younger demographic so that they would adopt it. They're more experimental, they're more adventurous. So it's trendy, number one. Number two is, if you think about social responsibility, organizations these days want to position themselves, and properly so, right, especially in the alcohol beverage industry, as promoting responsible drinking, right? These obviously, as NOLO offerings, right, meet that requirement. And again, it's trendy and in demand. If you move to demonstrates ESG, which is environmentally sensitive, right? Socially responsible, again. Companies with good governance, right? This again is an important thing that's required of the population generally these days and across the world, but certainly that younger demographic as well. It's trendy. But I do want to point to one of the biggest motivators, if not the biggest, which is the impact on enterprise value, right? It would make sense for any organization to be developing products that are socially responsible, are desired by a potential target consumer group, and could lead to an increased value of their enterprise. So enterprise value and associated with growth is important here. And how do you measure enterprise value? I want to give you a couple of examples. In the public markets, it's expressed in expanded price to earnings ratios, or multiples, I should say. And in the private enterprise markets, it's the same measure. Private companies are valued in comparison to their public peers, right? And therefore, the expansion of this multiple is very important. So let me take a couple of examples to show you how those that are socially responsible or transitioning there too, right, have expanded the strength of the power and size of their enterprise value. Tesla is a company that makes cars, but so is Ford. Ford, however, generates about 150 billion in revenue, Tesla about 67 billion, yet Tesla has a price to earnings multiple of 112 versus 5 for Ford. It clearly shows the expression and the demand and the enterprise value increase and impact associated with doing things that are in demand and socially responsible, right? EV in this case. Let me take a more stark example. ExxonMobil versus First Solar. They both produce energy, right? But from different, in different formats. ExxonMobil did 352 billion in revenue last year. First Solar, 2.5 billion, right? Less than 1% of the revenue size of ExxonMobil, right? But ExxonMobil only has a price earnings ratio of 10. First Solar, it's 75, right? Why is this, right? Again, it's how they're producing their energy. The point here is having a product that contributes an inordinately small financial positive to your business, right? So having a small, percentage of your business actually financially in terms of profits and revenue coming from a product such as NOLO, right, can have a tremendously inordinate impact in terms of enterprise value. So it's really important to note that there's many things that come together. Being socially responsible, complying with ESG, being trendy, but they're all around meeting consumer demands and the financial impact that has on your enterprise. A couple of other points I wanted to make about these products, NOLO products, is that they've been around for a while. Back in 2012, we identified, at least in the case here, the low ABV, as not just a fad, but a trend. We first saw it emerging in fortified wine cocktails, so the vermouths, the sherries, and the ports. And then we saw it expanding rather quickly to aperitivos, spritz drinks, mimosa flights. We also saw an expansion in the brunch occasion, day part drinking occasion at that time. And this expanded to more broader and promiscuous set of cocktails, Aperol Spritz being a pretty good example there. Shortly thereafter, right, but around the same time, 2014, we saw the mocktails coming into play, the non-alcoholic offerings. First, in the form of cocktails that were very tasty, originally targeted at non-alcohol drinkers, but Joe will share how that has changed over time, appearing on menus, and then moving into actual product development, where the craft beers, the craft sodas, the seed lips of the world, as Joe described a little earlier, came about. So with that said, let's see how this development of products and the offerings that are out there and the opportunities that reside there, right, are really driven by consumer needs and desires. Joe?
Thank you, Kevin. As a reminder to those who haven't participated in our webinar previously or haven't worked with our company before, Metrics Lab carries a unique area of expertise in the alcohol beverage category. We have a dedicated team of strategists, researchers, consultants, and operations department that specialize in alcohol beverage research. We do tracking studies, we partner with innovation teams, but today we really wanted to focus on one of our solutions, which is called Inspire. And we used Inspire to provide the details that we're going to overview in this webinar today. Essentially what the solution does is it scrapes publicly available data as a social listening tool and allows us to create rich profiles around consumers, around occasions, and other topic areas of interest. So we'll be showing you a snapshot of those today. And we'd first like to lay the groundwork for this with consumption behaviors of NOLO users. When Kevin and I speak with others about NOLO, the question that often comes up is, what are these consumers' relationship with alcohol? Are they abstaining altogether, or do they represent some other group? And you may be surprised to learn that those who are engaging with the NOLO category are overwhelmingly alcohol beverage drinkers, 77% in fact. So they are consuming alcoholic beverages, they're also consuming non-alcoholic beverages. And I think that the important point to underscore here is that when you're thinking about R&D efforts and when you're thinking about marketing efforts for the non-alcoholic category, the real size of prize, the real opportunity areas is with alcoholic drinkers. Your group of abstainers, so those who are exclusively not drinking alcohol, is only 18% versus the 77% of those who are dual users of alcoholic and non-alcoholic offerings. So who are these people? What do they look like? And where are they drinking these products? So we have on the left-hand side there, this is a share of talk. So among those that are on digital and social channels that are talking about non-alcoholic options, 66% of them are female. So 2/3 of those users are female. And those females tend to have a higher positive sentiment around non-alcoholic beverages at the 81% there that you see in that middle chart. But you know, there's certainly opportunity for males as well. They're at 72%, you know, overwhelmingly positive in terms of their sentiment about the talk of non-alcoholic beverage offerings. When you move down to those vertical charts, we take a look at what that dynamic looks like from an age perspective. 89% positive talk among those older than 21 years old, 85% among those that are older than 40. The real takeaway here is that talk about the non-alcoholic offerings is largely positive, be it among different genders, be it among different age groups. This is something that people are overwhelmingly embracing. And when we start to think about, you know, what are those locations where people are actually consuming these beverages? It's largely off-premise, which is not a surprise, given that the majority of volume in countries tends to reside in the off-premise anyways. 61% of those are having it at or around their home, which you see followed by a couple of on-premise locations, including restaurants, bars, and cafes. And when people are chatting about their non-alcoholic usage or brands, it is largely, as it relates to their occasions, these are largely relaxing at home occasions. So perhaps unwinding after work with a non-alcoholic drink, or having one on the weekends, special occasions, social gatherings, and work also coming in for the occasions at which people are having non-alcoholic beverages. Perhaps they're wanting to keep their wits about them. Perhaps they're wanting to have a drink, but not absent the effects of alcohol. And finally, before we transition to our Q&A section, wanted to discuss the consumer-driven needs within the non-alc space, as well as opportunity areas. The first piece that we wanted to address is the importance of packaging. We know packaging makes a large difference in the alcohol beverage category in terms of consumer choice, as well as categories outside of alcoholic beverage. And that carries over to non-alcoholic beverage offerings as well. People are looking for something that looks nice, that they can put on their bar, or even in an on-premise environment, compel them to actually choose that non-alcoholic brand. So packaging representing an important pillar for non-alc as well. In terms of barriers to overcome, there are primarily two of them. The first one is taste. Consumers wanting something that actually tastes good. Imagine that. And I like the quote that we found when we were performing this Inspire social listening study. Someone said that it tasted like rancid currants and old socks. I can't imagine anyone choosing a beverage that tastes like that. And we see a lot of this coming through in terms of barriers to people choosing to drink non-alcoholic beverages. And if you think about it within that framework as well, that underscores the importance of a really strong and compelling drink strategy for these non-alcoholic offerings. The other barrier is price. Consumers do not have the expectation that they would be paying the same price for a non-alc offering versus a full alc offering. One of these individuals mentioned brands not having to pay duty on these offerings. So why are they being priced at parity or close to at parity with full alc offerings? So making sure that companies and suppliers are keeping that in mind as we're looking to price these products. In terms of how to motivate consumers to try these products, sampling is something that these consumers globally indicated to us as something that would be important for them in terms of compelling them to actually try these products and then ultimately purchase them if they meet their taste expectations. Common marketing tool employed by organizations in terms of full out offerings also applicable here. And then related to the barrier of price, right? Individuals that haven't tried a new product, that may not have tried a non-alc offering in the past, there's a certain barrier to them purchasing one of these products because they are priced similar to what consumers are paying to full alc offerings. So in underscoring the importance of really having small sizes available for consumers so that they can take that financial leap and not think, well, I don't want to spend this much money on this product. I don't know what it tastes like. And I certainly don't want to dislike it and have it sit on my shelf, having spent all of that money on the offering. Now we'll take a look at some of your questions. Kevin, I think you've been in the background reviewing those. Do you have any coming through?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's 13 or so of them, and we're only going to have time for probably one or two. So why don't you, let me read this one. I'll read it aloud, and why don't you take this one, and then I'll take the next one. So it's the question is, I've been reading about stagnation or decline in hard seltzer sales lately, which tend to be low ABV. How do you rationalize that in light of the observed growth in other low alc and non-alc offerings? So how would you rationalize that against what you see?
It's a good question. It's no surprise that category really took off, especially in the last 2 years, motivated, I think, by the pandemic, right? We had the on-premise environment closed. It was easy and convenient to pop the top on one of these hard seltzer offerings, and you have a tasty drink, be it what you may have ordered in the on-premise previously, or just were looking for the convenience of having those available. Not to mention the fact that they're easily delivered to your home these days, right? I think that we're at a point now where we're probably reaching peak mass in that category. I mean, when you think about how quickly that category grew or has grown in the last couple of years and the huge proliferation of brands that have come onto the market, I think that we're at a point now where the developed brands are going to stick around, and a lot of these ones that haven't really taken hold in the marketplace likely will go away. It reminds me of the proliferation of flavored vodkas in the early to mid 2010s, where we were just seeing a new flavor offering coming to the market every month, and kooky ones at that, right? The marshmallow flavored vodka or the cereal flavored one. And then eventually the marketplace consolidates, and the ones that are going to stick around, and the other crazy variants kind of die off. I think we're at a point now with seltzers. It's a developed category. It will continue to be large, but I think that you're going to see fewer brands and fewer offerings in the marketplace coming in the coming years.
I also think, one point to bring up is that using your flavored vodka, that was a 10 to 15 year run, right? everything happened here because of a compressed cycle so quickly, right, with the pandemic, right? I don't think anybody would suggest that these weren't going to have a run, right? Or that run's over, right? Just a moderated growth, maybe it's stagnant, right? But it all happened in 2 years, right? Which is different than what you normally see in a product's life cycle. And I could see the same thing happening with the whiskeys, right? Just another flavor one. So just a couple other points, to bring up there. Thanks, Joe. I was looking at these. I'm going to answer this question. I like this one. It's what is your perspective on the chances of success for a non-alcoholic offering as an extension of an established parent brand, so like a Tanqueray 0.0, versus a New World offering, and I'll say like a Cutwater or a High Noon, right? Are there any credibility concerns? Now, as I was thinking about this when I read it, I think it really comes down to, if you think about legacy brands, so the Tanquerays of the world, right? What's their profile, and do they have baggage or not, right? So I'm kind of envisioning now, if I were Cutty Sark, not to be critical, right? And I thought of, canned Cutty Sark and soda, right? I'd be saying to myself, at least from a potential success here, that the demographics probably a little too old for that. In fact, very old from my perspective. The equity of the brand, generally speaking, not high, right? It's had its day to a large extent, although I've seen resurgences, right? Some of the people could say it's the PBR of Scotch, right? You do see it around, but I wouldn't suggest it's trendy. ESG compliant, I don't know, maybe it is. The messaging's not out there, right? So it's got some legacy baggage. However, if I talk about Tito's and soda in a can, it might be quite different, right? Demographic targets right, equity is powerful, right? ESG compliant, expressed it from the day it's kind of come out, right? Trendy and the like. So I think the first thing I look at is within the legacy brand, what's their profile, what's their positioning, right? What's their baggage or non-baggage? But now let's look at that versus a new brand, right? A new brand has the ability just to start from a clean slate, right? They can pick their target, they can pick their brand, right? And really take advantage of the fact that they don't have a legacy, right? They can start from scratch, right? There's probably some negatives or more, greater challenges there, depending on where that new brand is coming from. An existing supplier, brewer, vintner, or just a new company might be more expensive, right? Just to market this thing out of nowhere, to create a brand in essence. Distribution, the support around that, distribution networks, right? Building them might be challenging. But at the end of the day, there's probably significant upside there. So if we were to look at a Cutwater or a High Noon, as I mentioned, right? They've done a nice job of targeting the right consumer with something that was priced acceptably, right? And has a good flavor and taste profile. So at the end of the day, if I compare the legacy versus the new, it really to a large extent comes down to, right, the legacy's baggage or not, and whether or not, right, that could be really well positioned and therefore have a great advantage, right? Because it already has an established target market with the right positioning versus a new brand that might have to spend a lot more to establish itself. So if I were to think of, a Tito's and soda, I'd probably be putting my money behind that, right? Because of already the established strength it has, right? Versus a new brand that was trying to go up against it at an early stage. And hopefully that makes sense. But I think with that, we are actually right on the mark. It's the 30-minute mark. I want to thank everybody for listening to us. We hope it was informative. Joe, thank you, for your contribution as well in leading many of these sections. We will follow up to answer the questions in a written format for those we didn't get to. And as I mentioned, there's at least another 10 or so we have to get at. And so until next time, thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you at the next webinar.